The Great Depression is the single greatest reason for the collapse of international peace. It led to aggression and the collapse of international cooperation in the Manchurian crisis, where both the League of Nations and collective security were exposed as hollow concepts. It brought Hitler to power, undermined the Geneva disarmament talks, and weakened the United Kingdom and France, who were the guardians of the status quo. Political and social turmoil, war debts, and government deficits, which were a result of the First World War, played a major role in the Depression. It destroyed the economic welfare of the world. It also destroyed the optimism created by the Locarno Treaty, Kellogg-Briand Pact, the League of Nations, and other attempts at international cooperation. These progressive idealistic agreements were forgotten or ignored in the selfish, cynical world of the 1930s. The Depression was not caused by the Wall Street crash of 1929. The roots of the Depression can be found in the weakened state of many nations after the First World War, particularly Germany and the United Kingdom, which had been economic powerhouses prior to 1914. In addition, the turmoil in Russia and Eastern Europe had further weakened trade and world markets. Nations adopted a narrow attitude where they were now no longer willing to cooperate through trade and exchange, but adopted an exclusionary, bomb-shelter mentality where they cut off contact with their neighbors, raised tariffs, and ceased to care much about the world beyond their own borders. The Depression did produce aggressive states, as those who were driven to extremes of hardship saw war and conquest as a solution to their problems. This was such as in the case of Japan's attack on Manchuria. The Japanese, who were terribly afflicted by the decline of world trade, argued that they would starve without Manchuria. The collapse of the American markets and higher US tariffs created resulted in Japan's massive unemployment and reports of starvation in their rural areas. The disastrous economic situation led to a decline in the prestige of the liberal democratic government and demands for action by radical nationalist groups. Militarily, Japan's decision to invade Manchuria made good sense. Manchuria lies in close proximity to Japan and its colony Korea. China was dissolved in the Civil War and could offer no resistance. Since the Washington Conference of 1922, Japan had military supremacy in East Asia, and none of the great powers had the forces or bases in the region to oppose her. Lastly, the Depression had caused further cuts in armament spending in the West and the UK. France and the USA were in no position to intervene. Japan invaded Manchuria on the pretext that her property and citizens had been attacked by Chinese troops. Radical nationalists manufactured the incident in an attempt to force civilian government to support military action. The Chinese were rapidly defeated, and in 1932, Japan established the puppet state of Manchukuo. This was a clear challenge to the principle of collective security and the League. The USA and the UK were not able to cooperate on a policy with respect to Manchuria. Neither country wanted to be responsible for taking the lead. Only France and the UK had substantial military power after World War I, but neither power had the bases in the Far East to support an effective challenge. There was a crucial absence of motivation to undertake a military mission. There were expectations for the United States to intervene as it supported the open door policy to prevent China from coming under the influence of a single power. However, the US had been suspicious of Japan and her rival for power in the Pacific, and might have interpreted their Manchurian action as a challenge to Americans' interests. Nevertheless, the USA took no action over Manchuria. The precise reasons for this failure to respond included the lack of armed forces or bases necessary to support any military expedition. The US policy of isolationism, which had grown stronger after the First World War, would have made it difficult to develop any enthusiasm for an initiative in Asia. Most Americans lacked a vital interest in the development of Asia. They were also severely affected by the Depression, and the population was focused on the internal domestic crisis, with little interest in foreign affairs and a marked unwillingness to devote any further resources to them. A strategic consideration also influenced British and US policy. The UK and the US had extensive property, trading networks, and investments in China and the Far East. Neither power was in a position to defend these in the face of Japanese hostility. Any serious attempt to oppose might result in retaliation against these interests. The League's response to the crisis was to send out a fact-finding mission under Lord Lytton. The Lytton Commission report, which was issued in 1932, devoted particular attention to the origins and development of the state of Manchukuo, which had already been proclaimed by the time the Commission reached Manchuria. It recognized that Japan had some justifiable grievances about the situation in Manchuria, but should have tried other solutions before resorting to force. It suggested that China grant independence to Manchuria and that Japan withdraws its forces. Though this did not represent a strong condemnation, Japan refused to accept the criticism and withdrew from the League of Nations. In the end, the Lytton report served to show the weaknesses of the League of Nations and its inability to enforce its decisions. Subsequently, Manchuria became the puppet state of Manchukuo.